Let's take a look at a few key points. These brought to you by the Israeli public broadcaster Khan, although we agree with them, so we'll put them on the screen. First of all, if you hear Lapid, 3 key points. Number one, maybe the most important, Sarah, do what he can, what's in his power to do to increase turnout among Israel's Arab public. We've talked about this a lot over the course of this campaign. Why? This is one of the few real wild cards out there that could swing the election. Things that are really, truly different from one election cycle to the next, right? Arab turnout has ranged in our 4 past election cycles from 65% at its high to 45% at its low. That is a significant difference that can make the difference in an election. It had been thought that Arab turnout would be toward the low end of that spectrum. Some pollsters starting to say in the last few days they're detecting an uptick and that it won't be quite at that 45% mark, could be closer to the 50, maybe 55% mark. That could make a big difference. Again, these are not necessarily parties in Israel's complicated politics that will go with Lapid, meaning they won't necessarily let him win the election, but their presence in the parliament could essentially block the Netanyahu block the Netanyahu coalition and help Lapid fight it to a draw. So that's number one. Number two, avoid campaigning in Likud strongholds, right? Usually in elections in democracies, or often you want to go to the other guy's turf, right? Try to bring around swing voters. Not quite how Israeli elections work, and for that matter, elections in some other democracies these days. The emotional issue of the different groups within Israeli Jewish society, Ashkenazim from Eastern European heritage and Mizrahim or Sephardim from Middle Eastern or North African heritage, is still a strong issue. And in some of those Likud strongholds, the presence of Yair Lapid could generate those emotions, right, of Mizrahim against Ashkenazim, and that's something he'll want to avoid. He'll want to try not to bring out Netanyahu's base, which is essentially what that would achieve. And number three, equally important, it's a technicality, but maybe an all-important one, Sarah, those parties within Lapid's bloc, particularly in this case, the Labor Party and the Meretz Party, two Zionist Jewish parties, but to the left of Yesh Atid, of Lapid's party. Lapid will want to make sure that each of those parties gets enough votes to get back into the Israeli parliament. He'll want to take votes from them, but not so many votes that they drop below 3.25% of the vote. Then they get wiped out completely, and that would certainly help Netanyahu's bloc because some of those votes would be, in a sense, allocated to him. As for Netanyahu, let's put his main points in this home stretch up on the screen. 3 points from Netanyahu as well. Of course, increased turnout in his own strongholds. Obviously, any politician wants to do that. The Likud party, Netanyahu's party, has said over the course of the past few election cycles, not enough of their people have come out to vote. Netanyahu want to make sure that that changes, so that's number one. Number two, making sure that the Likud has a large gap over other parties within Netanyahu's own bloc, particularly the religious Zionism and Jewish Power Party, or Jewish Power Zionism coalition, particularly Itamar Ben-Gvir, that far-right lawmaker with a lot of charisma who's gotten a lot of attention the last few months, potentially for taking some votes away from Netanyahu. So that's number two. Number three, what we have phrased as monitoring Arab sector polling stations for fear of falsification. Certainly, Sarah, there is, one would assume, some fraud in Israeli elections, certainly the way that ballots are counted. Fraud, we know, not on a wide scale, and it's certainly legitimate to try to make sure that that fraud doesn't happen. On the other hand, there may be some kind of element of intimidation here. I am not saying that the Likud is going to do what's being done in Arizona, or it's planned to be done in Arizona in the United States, having people with weapons outside of polling stations, right? But there may be an element here of having your monitors outside the station that may, on the margins, be designed to stop Arab voters from coming out, which is certainly a Likud interest. On the other hand, obviously, it's legitimate to check for fraud. So in any event, those are the keys from Netanyahu's perspective. Of course, we mentioned less than 48 hours to go, so we'll know pretty soon.
Yeah, and you mentioned Itamar Ben-Gvir, Otzma Yehudit. Is he's going after the Haredi party to garner more votes. What's his strategy been like? That's
right. We talked about, Sarah, the battle between Netanyahu and the Likud party and Itamar Ben-Gvir for votes among Netanyahu's base, right? Where Itamar Ben-Gvir and his charisma and his political abilities, and let's say the truth, some of his political positions, policy positions, might appeal to some of those base voters. But Ben-Gvir is also going in another direction. He's trying to take votes from Israel's ultra-Orthodox or Haredi population. We tend to think, Sarah, that this is a well-defined group that follows its rabbi's orders and votes for its own sectoral political party.
Right.
But the reality is more complicated. And Ben-Gvir, a religious nationalist, potentially going for votes from within a Haredi bloc where the rabbis themselves, at least, are not, formally speaking, nationalists, but where some of the voters might be. So again, peace is unlikely to break out on this front. The politicians from the ultra-Orthodox parties angry that Ben-Gvir is going after what they see as their birthright, their voters. Ben-Gvir is saying that the ultra-Orthodox politicians are selling out to the left. The ultra-Orthodox responding that Ben-Gvir is selling out to the secular public and going to sell out the Haredi interests. So again, obviously a vote for the battle for those votes on the margins. We'll have to analyze the results come Wednesday, Thursday morning when we see them, to click on those ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, see how Ben-Gvir did.